Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to absolutely demystify Vermont's testing policies for parents, guardians, and educators. Look, if you've ever stared at a school calendar completely filled with testing windows and felt a literal knot of confusion, or let's be honest, maybe even a little dread in your stomach, you are in exactly the right place. Today, we're cutting through the noise and breaking down the facts directly from the source material to give you some much-needed clarity and confidence. So, let's get into it. Okay, let's tackle the biggest, most anxiety-inducing question right out of the gate. Does a single test dictate your child's entire future? The short answer? No way. But we do need to understand exactly what these tests actually measure and how that info gets used in your specific district. You know, testing season always brings a ton of rumors, so we're going to stick strictly to the actual state guidelines and clear the air for good. To give us a really clear roadmap today, we're covering 5 key areas. 1. The Vermont testing landscape. 2. Accommodations and exceptions. 3. How results are actually used. 4. Testing and graduation. And 5. The exact questions you as a parent should be asking. Starting with Section 1, the Vermont testing landscape. Basically, what's required and why. It's really a mix of federal expectations, state assessment rules, and local district practices. Vermont evaluates student progress using statewide assessments in core subjects. This helps identify learning needs and lets schools track achievement over time. Generally, you're going to see standardized tests for English language arts and math, which are aligned to academic standards, as well as science at specific grade levels. Plus, there are specific English learner assessments and alternative assessments, which we'll get into in just a bit. Think of these core subjects as puzzle pieces, right? They help the state piece together a complete picture of how well schools are actually serving their unique student populations. Now, here is a super critical distinction to keep in mind. Being required to take a test absolutely does not mean your child is going to face a penalty for a low score. In most cases, students in Vermont public schools are expected to participate because, well, it's a key part of the state's accountability system. But here's the kicker. A required test is almost always used for school improvement or progress monitoring. It is not some pass-or-fail gatekeeper for your student. It's an open door for progress, not a gavel of punishment. Which naturally leads to a really common question. You might be wondering, can we just opt out? Can you just say, no thanks? Well, policies on refusal or non-participation can actually get pretty complicated, and they can negatively impact a school's reporting data and participation rates. Because the real-world impact depends so heavily on current Vermont rules and your specific district's procedures, your best bet is for sure to speak directly with your school's administration to understand the lay of the land before making any firm decisions. Okay, moving on to Section 2, accommodations and exceptions and how we adapt to the student. Because a standardized test does not mean every single student has to take it under the exact same standard conditions. The crucial point here is that accommodations, which are documented in plans like an IEP or a 504 plan, they level the playing field. They act like a staircase, right? Giving students fair access to show what they actually know. They absolutely don't give anyone an unfair advantage, they just remove barriers. And Vermont schools are literally required to provide these when they're appropriate and documented. And these supports, they are highly individualized. So whether that means extending the time on the clock, taking the test in a quiet small group setting, or using headphones and assistive technology, these adjustments are all about ensuring comfort and focus. Plus, students with the most significant cognitive disabilities might even qualify for alternate assessments altogether. The big takeaway here is that decisions about these accommodations need to be hammered out well in advance with your child's support team. Now, this brings up another really important exception. What happens if a student is still in the process of building their academic English skills? Think about it. Testing a student on some complex science concept when they're still actively learning the English vocabulary for that concept, that wouldn't be a fair or accurate measure of their actual science knowledge. So to fix this, schools test their language proficiency first to figure out the right level of support and then provide academic accommodations. For instance, if a student totally understands photosynthesis but just doesn't know the English word for it quite yet, language support ensures they can still show off their scientific brilliance. These language assessments are huge because language development impacts literally every other academic subject. The ultimate goal is always to measure what the student actually knows as fairly as possible. All right, Section 3, how results are used and what the real stakes are. Now we shift from taking the test to what happens after. Where does all this data actually go? We can track it across 3 distinct levels. First up, teachers. They use these results for instructional planning, tweaking lessons or setting up targeted interventions if a student is struggling. Second, state and federal systems use it for school accountability, basically evaluating overall school performance and spotting broader trends. And third, you, the family. You use it for communication. It gives you a clear window into your child's academic strengths and any potential gaps. Districts also use all this big picture data to improve their curriculums and student services across the board.
But listen, it is so vital to remember that these results are just one single piece of a much broader picture. They absolutely do not define your child's full ability. I mean, a standardized test score cannot possibly measure your child's incredible creativity, their empathy, their daily work ethic, or how much they've grown socially this year. In Vermont, the understood standard is that the very best use of testing is simply as one data point among many.
Which brings us to Section 4, Testing and Graduation. Let's ease some of that anxiety. Because this naturally leads to what feels like the highest stakes of all, high school graduation. This is where parents and students tend to feel the absolute most pressure. Your immediate fear might be, what if one bad test day ruins everything? If a student wakes up sick or just has a terrible testing morning, is their high school diploma suddenly on the line? Deep breath. You can relax a bit. Because in Vermont, a single test score is very rarely the sole basis for graduation or promotion. Graduation requirements are actually determined by a mix of state policy and local school expectations. And that usually includes completing specific coursework and demonstrating proficiency in a whole variety of ways. We're talking portfolios of their work over the year or localized graduation requirements that go way, way beyond a single bubble sheet test. While state assessments absolutely inform student progress, they aren't some lone insurmountable hurdle to graduation. That being said, it's always a good idea to review your high school-specific graduation checklist early on, especially if you're transferring schools or taking an alternative pathway. And finally, Section 5, Questions Parents Should Ask. This is your action plan. Let's turn all this policy into a practical toolkit you can actually use. Because understanding the rules is great, but knowing how to advocate for your student, that's even better. So, to prepare your family, you want to ask your school these 4 specific questions. First, ask exactly what tests are coming up and when. That way you can block out those dates and avoid scheduling, say, a random dentist appointment in the middle of a math test. Second, ask what specific accommodations are available for your child, especially if they have an IEP or 504. Third, ask how the school actually uses the resulting data. And fourth, ask if there are any local testing expectations beyond the state requirements. Figuring out who to contact about test anxiety or accessibility well ahead of time is going to save you so much stress when testing season actually hits. I want to leave you with this really powerful bottom line directly from our source material today. Used well, tests help schools identify strengths, address gaps, and support every single learner more effectively. But they are only one chapter in your child's educational story. Which leaves us with a pretty fascinating question to think about. If testing is just one chapter, how are you and your school partnering to write the rest of your students' completely unique story? Thanks so much for learning with me today, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.